Um, Ladies and gentlemen, apologize for the momentary delay, but everyone is connected. And I want to wish you a good morning for those of you watching in the United States, and good evening to our colleagues from Nur Sultan and others from Central Asia. I want to welcome our distinguished panel, whom I will introduce in a moment. But we're honored to have so many of you with us this morning. We have over 100 people for the virtual launch of our new report, a very timely report, Foreign Investment in Central Asia, Actors and Drivers. And the report has been researched, written, and produced by the International Tax and Investment Center's Energy, Growth, and Security Program. This is our fourth report in as many years on Central Asia. The previous reports have looked at hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, which are the laws and the legal frameworks, and post-COVID building resilience. We will share links to all of these previous reports, as well as the new report in a post-webinar email that will go to each of you. So each of you will receive a link to this report that we're going to be releasing today. We'll have that to you within 24 hours. Our new report on Central Asia focuses on how the republics are moving from the health phase of the pandemic to the economic recovery phase. Now, let's be candid. Economic growth is the only way to restore government finances and employment. Smart tax and regulatory policies are essential to drive the recovery. There are no quick fixes. However, we are optimistic that the health tragedy of COVID may be the catalyst that drives economic diversification, advances further reforms, and smart policies that will in turn attract new forms of investment into the region. We're already seeing this in Kazakhstan with a big food processing investment. And the ambassador or the deputy minister will talk more about that. As countries and companies seek to diversify their supply chains, Central Asia should be considered. This will spur diversification from the traditional economic model of oil and gas revenues that have been very successful and profitable for these republics, but may not be sustainable over the long term. So these are new opportunities. We are on the verge of unprecedented opportunity for Central Asia to emerge as a hub for trade and commerce. Now, as you may be aware, ITIC, a nonprofit research and education foundation, has been working in Central Asia alongside local partners and governments since 1993. Our focus has been on tax and investment reform. During the past 30 years, we have witnessed enormous changes and significant advances in development. The countries and their people are much better off, more prosperous, and enjoying a higher quality of life. No question, the reforms and growth have delivered for the people of Central Asia. The governments who took bold and early steps to liberalize their economies and encourage capital formation domestically and welcome FDI are faring significantly better than their peers who have lagged in these reforms. This progress is fully examined in our report. But our report is intended to be forward-looking, not merely a historical document. We hope it will be a roadmap to help guide the governments of Central Asia to develop a strong and sustainable post-COVID economic recovery. Today, we are joined by the report's co-authors, Dr. Ariel Cohn and James Grant. I also want to thank a very impressive group of ITIC interns who played a key role in supporting the research, in particular, Ms. Haley Arlene. His Excellency Erjan Kazakhanov, Kazakhstan's ambassador to the USA, will share further introductory remarks. Then we will turn it over to the co-authors to briefly present the report and hopefully entice you to read the report when you receive it by tomorrow. And then we will have comments from two distinguished panelists, His Excellency Amos Adinov, who is the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Economics. And as you may recall, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been given the mandate for investment promotion. So he is the key person to oversee investment promotion around the world on behalf of the ministry. And then from a macroeconomic perspective, we have Ms. Medina Yunusbekova, who is a senior advisor to the executive director at the IMF. So, Mr. Ambassador, if I could turn it over to you and then just hand it over to Ariel and James, and we'll keep it moving with minimal interruptions by me. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for your introductory remarks, and thank you for hosting this important event today. And I would like to welcome my friends and pleased to join you here at the virtual launch of the new report by the International Tax and Investment Center called Foreign Investment in Central Asia, Actors and Drivers. And I would like to thank the authors of the report, Dr. Ariel Cohen and Mr. James Grant, as well as the ITIC leadership for their continuous support of the Central Asia through providing better understanding of our region and shedding the light to the investment opportunities in our part of the world. As you rightly mentioned, current challenges with COVID-19 demonstrated the vulnerability of the global economy. However, it has also showed the resilience of certain countries. In this context, I would like to note that Kazakhstan is going through these challenges with great confidence. The government of Kazakhstan takes concrete measures to overcome the consequences of pandemic and provides much needed support to its neighbors. The total amount allocated by the government to mitigate the outcomes of pandemic was around 9% of the country's GDP. It is in this context, with all due importance of oil and gas sector, Kazakhstan has a strategic direction for diversification of the economy towards downstream processing industries. Targets include agribusiness, green energy, high-tech, healthcare, and many others. As you may see in the report, Kazakhstan has huge trade and economic potential, and the investment attractiveness of the country is rapidly increasing. There is an old saying stating that in crisis comes an opportunity. And I would like to mention that I just came out from a very important meeting that we had today in the morning, the strategic partnership dialogue between US and Kazakhstan governments that we conduct on an annual basis. And today's discussion were particularly referred to the economic pillar. And I'm glad that to register that US remains to be main investor into the Kazakhstan economy. There are hundreds of the US companies operating in Kazakhstan. And taking this opportunity, I would like to welcome my colleagues, Deputy Minister Almas Aydarov, whom you introduced, Dan. He's an excellent expert and knowledgeable diplomat who works in the sphere of trade and economics and investment. And I also would like to welcome Medina Yunusbekova, a Kazakh representative to the IMF and the Bretton Woods institutions. And thank you very much. Once again, let me thank the authors and thank you for helping to raise awareness of the Central Asia and our opportunities, and specifically Kazakhstan. Thank you very much.
Ariel.
I would let James go first. That's how we planned it. Go ahead, James. James. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank or echo rather, Dan's remarks, thanking our distinguished guests for joining us this morning. It's an honor to share a screen with Ambassador Kazikhanov, the Deputy Minister Aidarov, and Ms. Zhunuzbekova. I'd also like to give a special thank you to the entire EGS team, led by Dr. Cohen, who came together to make this event possible. We simply could not have put together a report of this size and scope without our crack team of interns. So I did just quickly want to thank them: Haley Arlen, Joshua Geller, Luke Harris, Sarah Musavi, David Pasmanik, Alexandra Perwansky, Ali Plusinski, and Talia Yuzuku. Okay, now I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving you all a 35,000-foot view of Central Asia's investment picture based on our findings. This will be sort of a primer for those of you in the audience who aren't as familiar with Central Asia, and tee up Dr. Cohen nicely for a bit more of the nitty-gritty outlook and analysis. So, like the rest of the world, Central Asia has been hit hard by the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, particularly from an investment perspective. And that's because export-oriented and commodity-linked investments are among the most seriously affected by the economic lockdown. These sorts of investments happen to be the biggest drivers of investment inflows in the region. So think hydrocarbons, mining, metallurgy, agriculture. Now, the dust is still settling, but again, due to the nature of these economic lockdowns, most believe that global investment flows in 2020 will actually, FDI flows will actually be lower than they were during the financial crisis. So that's quite a big deal. In terms of FDI inflows to Central Asia, we have seen Central Asia as a whole, FDI inflows constrict over the past decade. In 2010, total net inflows to Central Asia were around 14 billion USD. Last year, that total was actually 8.5. Now that of course coincides, if you recall, 2010 to 2014, when energy prices were at sky highs, and then they promptly imploded in 2014. So that does have a sort of direct correlation with FDI inflows into the region. In terms of the largest actors, it's actually the European Union that's the #1 actor in Central Asia's FDI, responsible for about 40% of investment in Central Asia, followed by China and the United States, and then Russia. Now, what's particularly unfortunate is that in 2019, that was actually sort of a bounce back year for Central Asia. FDI inflows have sort of been a bit volatile, going down, especially for Kazakhstan in 2017 to 2018, but FDI inflows actually bounced back in 2019. And they were trending upwards due to a host of monetary, fiscal, tax, and regulatory policy adjustments that some of the regional leaders like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan were putting into place. So unfortunately, COVID kind of pumped the brakes on that. Last year, October 2019, the World Bank projected GDP growth of the region at a positive 4.6%. Unfortunately, those have been revised downward since COVID, and in June, regional GDP growth has actually been changed to -2%. So we went from positive 6% to -2% due to COVID. So now that you have sort of the 35,000-foot view, let's go down into some of the specific countries. Let's start with Kazakhstan, which is Central Asia's wealthiest nation and investment leader. Over the past decade, Kazakhstan has received 7% of regional FDI inflows. Last year, I mentioned that Central Asia's total was about 8.5 billion in FDI. Kazakhstan was responsible for 3.6 of that FDI last year, or a little more than 40%. And this is because of the steady and concerted efforts towards diversifying their market economy. And we've seen that they've actually shot up the World Bank Ease of Doing Business rankings, and they're now 25th in 2020, which is incredibly impressive. And that's thanks to some of those reforms. Just in terms of the biggest drivers and sectors, it is the extractives industry. Kazakhstan is an OPEC Plus member. It's home to the world's 12th largest oil reserves. It's a large crude oil, copper, and uranium producer. So resource extraction is about 50% of FDI inflows into Kazakhstan, with manufacturing about 14%. But it also has a tremendous amount of arable land, around 6% globally. And they're only using or have only developed about 30%. So there's plenty of potential there in the agricultural sector. Kazakhstan is also becoming more and more a financial hub for the region. The Astana International Financial Center, AIFC, and their stock exchange, AIX, was opened just a few years ago. And with the creation of the AIFC and the AIX, we're seeing investment-friendly reforms take place, such as tax code simplification, special economic zones, and expanded investment tools for foreign investors. So we see the financial sector as a big potential area for future growth and investment. That being said, Kazakhstan's is a supply chain dependent economy, which is vulnerable to the COVID downturn. There is still a little bit more bureaucratic red tape than we would like to see. State-owned enterprises still play an outsized role in the economy, and there is persistent, albeit improving, low-level corruption concerns that need to be addressed. But there's plenty to be optimistic about, and our guests and Dr. Cohen more specifically can speak more to the outlook for Kazakhstan in 2021 and beyond. Next is Turkmenistan. So Turkmenistan is a near totalitarian regime with endemic corruption issues. While they did manage $2.1 billion gross FDI inflows last year, almost 70% of that was resource extraction. So to give you a better idea of that, 83% of their exports went to China, and this is pretty much all natural gas. So natural gas exports to the PRC made up 80% of Turkmenistan's GDP. 91% of national exports are from the extractives. Excuse me. As with the deal with China's National Petroleum Corporation, Turkmenistan is locked into a 30-year, 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas annual provision to China. And this is actually part of the reason why they were able to maintain positive 1% annual GDP growth in 2020. So they didn't go negative, partially because this contract is still in effect. So they're still providing natural gas to China. So despite having all of their eggs in one basket, and this is sort of the textbook, definition of lack of economic diversification and poor investment distribution, the fact that China is still buying their gas has actually kept their economy afloat in 2020. Tajikistan is much smaller. You're talking $210 million FDI, as opposed to the billions we saw with Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. But it is perilously reliant on remittances. So that was 2.5 billion, or 33% of its GDP in 2019. The economy is highly dependent on government state-backed infrastructure projects. The private sector only employs 13% of the economy. Let's see. And Beijing holds half of Tajikistan's 2.8 billion external debt, which is very worrisome. And the country does suffer from lack of property rights, minimal transparency in the country's court systems, and endemic corruption. Kyrgyzstan is a similar story. Unfortunately, they're looking at a 12% drop in their annual GDP in 2020. They just had a political revolution. Their capital their White House essentially was burned down. Investors don't like to see political revolution. That doesn't really, drive with them. So widespread corruption is a problem in Kyrgyzstan, and about 60% of economic activity in the country was actually part of the gray economy. So this is unregulated economic activity. Again, the FDI profile there is dominated by China and Russia. And finally, Uzbekistan, the other sort of bright spot and market economy in Central Asia, $2.3 billion last year, managing positive 0.7% GDP growth. They actually led their Central Asian neighbors in the rate of growth in foreign investment. They had a big year, up by 266% from 2018 to 2019. And that is the fruit that's being borne by liberalization reforms from President Mirziyoyev, which began in 2016. These very ambitious liberalization reforms that included economic development, education, government transparency. So investment has actually been good for Uzbekistan, and they actually have one of the more diversified economies in the region. They've been closed off for so long, they were sort of forced to be self-sufficient. So their economy is actually inherently diversified. They have a burgeoning tourist industry. Agriculture is 32% of their GDP, and some estimates put the value of their minerals at $11 trillion. They're a top gold producer. But of course, they do still suffer from some of the same challenges that the rest of the region does, which is trying to shake that Soviet legacy of heavy government involvement, bureaucratic red tape, complicated tax codes, and free and fair competition in the country. So now that we have that sort of general overview, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Cohen to give us a little bit more about the outlook and sort of the opportunities for investment in the region.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind words and your participation. I want to thank ITIC, which was the home for our energy growth and security program since 2018. I think we're moving apace in a good direction, Dan. Thank you, Dan, for being a champion and a supporter. Thank you, James. Without you, the program wouldn't exist. Thanks to the interns, and thanks to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is helping us to bring its members to this event. Thank you, ladies, very much. We are looking forward to work more with the U.S. Chamber. Also, of course, thank you, the Deputy Minister and Madina, for participating. I have been coming to Central Asia since '93. I saw the progress firsthand. And when President Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan, conceived the transition of the capital from Almaty to then Astana and now Nur Sultan, to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical. But Nur Sultan became the beating heart of the reform, not just for Kazakhstan, but for the whole Central Asia. And in these difficult times, and James is absolutely right, there are a number of metrics that suggest that the economic, social, health hit of this pandemic is going to be hard all over the world, including Central Asia. But the economic reform approach, and we heard about Kazakhstan moving up in the World Bank rankings. We heard about Uzbekistan conceived and moving forward with a broad reform, not just one particular area. In a hard, challenging time like ours now, what the countries can do moving forward, and what we are talking about in our report that is available on iticnet.org/resources and will be sent to all the participants, what these countries can do is to maximize their potential and develop their potential, including oil and gas, including minerals, but moving beyond that and diversifying the economy, as James suggested, as we suggest, and as the government of Kazakhstan, the government of Uzbekistan, and others, and international financial institutions and private investors are doing this day in and day out. So Nazarbayev's vision that was talking about developing a modern economy and governance, moving Kazakhstan to the OECD level of economy and governance up to 2050, moving Kazakhstan to the top 10-30 countries in the world, increasing the attractiveness. I think that vision is proving itself now day in and day out. And also Nazarbayev early was pushing both for Eurasian integration, and I I've written critical stuff about Eurasian integration if it happens only on Moscow's terms. If it happens on everybody's term and it's a win-win, then of course we will be fully in favor of it. But if you take the region is 70 million, 70 million people and growing rather fast. So don't think about the region as one country or another country. The region is uneven. If you go to Europe, if you can compare Albania, Bulgaria, Ukraine with the Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries, Germany, you see the discrepancies, you see the gaps. In Central Asia, because it's such a big region, it's territorially, Kazakhstan alone is like Western Europe. So in this region, you'll have the gaps. And a smart investor will figure out where to put their money in terms of high tech, in terms of telecoms, or in terms of ag, or in terms of minerals. So we're already witnessing, as we speak, AIFC, Astana International Financial Center, bringing the English law to the heart of Central Asia. Coming out recently with a bank called Kaspi, I think it's spelled Kaspi. We have a blog about it on Forbes. And Kaspi, just a small part of Kaspi that they floated in AIFC, in AIX stock market and in London, gives a valuation of $6 billion for a bank in Kazakhstan with a strong fintech position, okay? And moving ahead, in 21-22, already delayed because of COVID, they delayed the IPOs for Kazmunaygas, that's oil and gas, Kaz Telecom, Samruk Energy, and others. This will generate a lot of investor participation. And well, there are 500 companies registered at AIFC. Transportation, of course, when you have this location, which is strategic, yeah, Kazakhstan is landlocked, Uzbekistan is doubly locked. But Kyrgyzstan, for example, is on the border of China, so a railroad can come from China into Central Asia via Kyrgyzstan. And there are some issues. There are issues about the rail gauge, the size of the rail. The Russians don't want a European size rail. They want a Russian size, which is bigger for strategic reasons. And there's some local dislike of the Chinese preponderance. And in a place like Tajikistan, where the majority of debt is owned by Chinese, where most of the investment projects go to China and the other part goes to Iran, that creates some sanctions concerns. If I was a Tajik official, a Tajik investor, I would be very concerned about that as well. Uzbekistan, a very interesting case. 2016, President Mirziyoyev came, started the reforms. The reforms are wide, but I would say, unlike Kazakhstan, that really put its money where its mouth is. 9% of GDP is a big package of assistance. In Uzbekistan, they didn't have this money, so it was smaller. And they're running into limitations because of the quality of human capital, both on the reform level, the reform management level. You have to have broadly educated bureaucratic class, the elite class, and you have to have educated workers in order to staff those enterprises that would benefit from the investment. And a lot of countries in Central Asia are running into the personnel development constraints. This is something IFIs, international financial institutions, World Bank, regional banks, Asia Development Bank, the China-led development bank, our DFC, Development Finance Corporation, should really pay attention to that. I used to be a senior advisor in projects that developed the rule of law projects by the World Bank in Russia and Georgia. And I'm talking firsthand knowledge. If you don't have these resources, it is a challenge. Moving on, yes, Kashagan, one of the largest, probably the largest investment project in oil offshore in the Caspian, technically difficult, will produce close to 950 or 980,000 barrels of oil a day by 2025. It was a struggle, but that will bring Kazakhstan to 3 million barrels a day, God willing, 2025, comparable to Kuwait. But going beyond that, looking at the map, and when I say looking at the map, I don't just mean the world map and just putting a finger on the map. And unlike probably the majority of Americans, I can find these countries and recognize them, but drilling down much more carefully. How much sun illuminance, it's called, how much sun different parts of these countries receive, how much wind in different areas they receive. And you can see that Kazakhstan in the south has a lot of sun, Kazakhstan in the steppe in the north has a lot of wind, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have mountains, mountains get snow, snow melts, you get hydro. They probably all together have more energy that they need right now. That's why the high voltage lines are being built into Afghanistan and then more south to Pakistan and eventually maybe India if the relationships improve. If the new Taliban, as the US government wants it to do, I have my doubts, but God willing, yeah. If Afghanistan figures out its internal arrangements, these high voltage electric lines will be secure, railroads will be secure, and possibly eventually the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, TAPI pipeline. I've written about TAPI with my colleague from the Heritage Foundation, who is now still probably the senior director for Central Asia in the Trump administration. But regardless, 2007, they still are nowhere near that gas pipeline, but the potential is there. Another thing, the rare earth, rare minerals that are necessary for the green transition, right? If we are seriously to transition to electric vehicles, to solar, wind, and modern grid, we will need more rare earth minerals that are found in Central Asia. To develop those, there are modern financial tools that are being developed, including at AIFC. Agriculture, James noted, yes, there is a potential. There are also challenges. There are people on a wide population level that are afraid of private ownership of land. In my book, it is wrong-headed. It can be subject to public education campaigns to explain why a foreign investor cannot take that land and run away with it to Beijing or to Moscow or to New York or Washington. The land will be there for the benefit, hopefully, of the peoples of Central Asia. But investors can bring funds, technology, export markets, etc. I would say the potential across the board, not just in minerals and oil and gas, but developing modern 21st century economy. And I would add, for example, in the digital field, now we see in Kazakhstan, the blockchain technology that is used to speed up the transition of containers in the railroads, that with that blockchain, you track each individual container and they go fast through the borders, because unless this railroad transportation is competing by price with the sea, with the ship, and is much faster, it will not be competitive. We talked a lot about these railroads, but they need to be economically competitive, more competitive than now. And another important thing going forward, if you have a country like Turkmenistan or like Tajikistan that is mostly dependent on a monopsonistic investor, China, it's in your national interest to diversify the sources of investment. So if you are aware of the competition between China and US, you may go to Japan, you may go to South Korea, you may go to the EU, you may go to the Gulf, to the Emirates, and bring investors. And again, Kazakhstan is ahead of the game, but others are figuring the game out as well. Dan, how am I doing on time?
If you could maybe finish it up in a minute, I'm eager to hear our discussants, and we have some interesting comments and questions coming from our participants.
So let's try and see what are we facing here. Yes, we're facing probably the biggest challenge since independence for these countries. We had a successful political transition in Kazakhstan from the first president, President Nazarbayev, to President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who's a very experienced person. I met President Tokayev, probably 2007. Yes, 2006 and 7, and was extremely impressed. He was a foreign minister at the time, and I think the transition is working. President Tokayev is fully aware that Kazakhstan needs foreign investors, and there are many measures. We don't have time to talk about it. Uzbekistan understands it. Kyrgyzstan, because of the economic, political turmoil, and they have it regularly now. And this is the third revolution in what, 10 years? Maybe 20 years. Anyway, Kyrgyzstan needs to get their house in order. Tajikistan is facing transition eventually, and challenges of corruption, of drug smuggling, a lot of work. Turkmenistan is facing a transition issue and the lack of development of political institutions as well. But it is clear that what I call the 5 pillars of development, it's in our report, is 1, add green growth. Don't throw the baby with the bathwater. The hydrocarbons and minerals are important, but add green growth. It's a global trend. You cannot buck it. You may be behind the curve, but you cannot buck it. Add it, educate your people, develop the technology, develop the regulatory network, start putting the solar parks in and the windmills, and to integrate the grid. I have a bunch of publications in Forbes about it. Please go ahead and read it. 2, human capital. I already mentioned, you have to bring these people who were beneficiaries of pretty okay Soviet education system in things like sciences. Soviet math, physics, chemistry were okay. All the other things, they were behind, way behind. Economics, social sciences, etc. You need to bring these people into the 21st century. Balashak, the Kazakh program of educating students outside, is a brilliant example how you do it. Accelerate regulatory and policy reforms to support foreign domestic investment. Privatize state-owned enterprises across the board globally. I looked at 50 studies by the World Bank that prove that state-owned enterprises provide less added value and less profit to the shareholders. Privatize it, get rid of it. Now the crisis, don't let the crisis go unused. Boost small and medium enterprises and private-public partnerships. Put the laws in. Kazakhstan has 2 laws, and the Kazakh leaders telling me it's not sufficient, and other places don't even have that. Draft laws and regulations for PPP, private-public. Grow knowledge-based services to the extent you can. Kazakhstan, again, is doing it with AIFC, we said, with innovation parks. More needs to be done. You need to catch up. And this is an opportunity to put in mass digitalization. So you get more and more digitalized services, smart government. That technology was pioneered by Estonia. There are other countries, the countries you don't expect, have online one window government. You can click in and get your driver's license, your marriage license, your burial license, cradle to grave. The government should be working and be user-friendly. I tried to deal with my bank here in America yesterday, and they drove me crazy. 2 hours, I couldn't resolve the issue I had. Shouldn't be like that. Don't be like SunTrust Bank. Okay, and education now, because kids are stuck at home, improve your online education. And telecommuting, be more liberal about allowing people who can work from home. Of course, the supervisors need to pay attention that the quality of services does not deteriorate. With that, I do believe that the market of 70 million people, which is not heavily suffering under some kind of religious domination that denies women education and whatnot, thank God, women in Central Asia are more emancipated and more liberated than in many other countries. And then just play the catch-up game. The East Asian countries did it from the baseline that in many cases was worse. Education-wise, some of these places were worse than where you are. Look at Malaysia, look at Indonesia, etc. So the chances here, COVID is our chance, as paradoxical as it may sound. Take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ariel. And that was a very articulate roadmap to a sustainable, comprehensive, inclusive recovery that is needed across the world, and in this case, focusing on the 5 countries with 70 million people. I would like to turn to the Deputy Minister and then to Dr. Medina. Let me throw a couple of questions thinking that you may be able to address these in your comments just for efficiency. One, there was a question about the future development of the telecommunications sector, and that is integral to what Ariel mentioned about digitalization. You need to have the infrastructure. So what about telecom networks? And then there was another question, which is the kind of thing that I think Medina thinks about, talks about, hears about at the IMF, is what about the distribution of wealth in these countries? What is the Gini coefficient in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan? So those are questions from our panelists, from our participants, and I hope our panelists can touch on those as well as your own comments. So, Mr. Deputy Minister, if we could turn it to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. Before I will start my core speech, let me answer for the first question that you mentioned about the telecommunication. Of course, we have a separately program, the digitalization program in Kazakhstan, and it's including development of infrastructure of telecommunication. As you know, we have a very huge territory and a ninth place in the world, and it's a core issue for development of digitalization. It's a providing of telecommunication, and we have a separately PPP contract, a very huge contract for the 7 years, and it started last year. It will cover all the cities and the villages of Kazakhstan to provide at least 3G signal, and it will finish after the 5 years. And during the pandemic, of course, we see that we were forced to change this program, because we see that it's cover not maybe so efficiently social moments, and we little bit changed the rules for the big enterprises, which are also included into this program, and developing 4.0 industry program. Thank you.
Very good. Medina, Mr. Deputy Minister, would you like to share some more? Or you want to wait for the discussion?
I think the second question is better to answer
For Medina, okay. And you may have a couple of comments to make in addition to answering the question?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Okay,
and
please.
After the questions, I will return and will speak my
okay,
speech.
Medina, do you want to address the Gini coefficient? And then we'll...
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the Gini coefficient, the latest data for Kazakhstan is 27.5, and for Uzbekistan is 35. And we well, like 100% is like for the public to explain is like perfect inequality when everything is unequal, and zero is a perfect equality. So we see that like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they are like in the first quarter of this, so which means that we are more equal than unequal. But of course, there is a room for improvement. And as always, I think like every economist would say that. And I think that these are like the main goal of every government to to work with Gini coefficient and like to make all structural reforms to work to reduce this inequality. So this is probably the short answer for the question. And then I'm happy to tell more in my own
Okay,
language.
thank you. And that the Genie question came from Maria. Thank you. And Timo Hallenberg was the one with telecom. And then Mark Miller, a longtime friend of the region, asked a question about the Blue Dot Network. And is that going to move forward in the region? So we want to hear from, again, from Medina and Almas. So Medina, you're on the screen now. Maybe just if you could share a couple of comments that you had prepared in advance, that would be good. And then Almas, if you could do the same. And if one of, and maybe Almas, you could touch on the Blue Dot Network.
Yeah, sure. Can I start right now?
Please, please.
Thank you. So first of all, let me thank the panelists, and it was very interesting for me to hear your perspective, like to hear about my own country, but also for our beloved region. And it was interesting to hear like different points of view. I'm happy to be a part of this discussion as well. So. Of course, what I can say, our region was hit by COVID-19 related pandemic, and as it was mentioned in the beginning of our discussion, the growth right now is projected to contract by 2.1% in 2020, and everything is after like the region was growing the path of almost 5% in 2019. Well, some countries were hit more than the others. I think in our region, like the countries which were hit the most, they are Armenia, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, but the good news is the baseline projection for our region assumes that we will rebound in 2021, and it is good thing. Of course, considerable uncertainty continues to remain, and we see that not only our region but the global economic outlook and depends on the evolution of the pandemic and the development of this unprecedentable like health crisis, and how economic policies would respond to this crisis and boost growth. So on the upside, I can say that this crisis is very unusual, and activity could pick up faster than currently expected if the pandemic is contained. And I'm happy to hear good news that vaccines are coming, and that already few countries announced that vaccines are coming. So hope remains in our heart, I think. So in terms of macroeconomic point of view, I would be very brief. I think that, the good thing about current situation as a banking system in our region was quite resilient. And as for Kazakhstan, for example, last year there was conducted a review of the whole banking and financial sector, and it was the conclusion of this AQR review was that banking sector is very sustainable and has a lot of buffers of capital. So I think this is very important to hear for investors which are coming to the region. And Dr. Cohen already mentioned that we have a lot of room for investors to come. So I think from a macroeconomic standpoint of view, we have quite good results in the region and in Kazakhstan. Recently, actually last month in November, there was a first online mission of the IMF to Kazakhstan. So, and the team was meeting the authorities, like main economic bloc ministries, as well as prime minister. So, and the conclusion of this mission was that the authorities are taking good care, taking very good steps and structural reforms, also to support financial sector, but also the most vulnerable households and businesses. So I think this is the ground for the future economic growth and for the investment. And let me conclude by saying that recently there was one very interesting study made by the IMF staff, and basically it was a discussion how countries can boost economic growth in the post-pandemic world. So, and the answer to this question was very similar to this discussion: investments, public investments and private investments. And there was a linkage made between public investments and how they basically also help people and economic actors to understand that everything is going well in the region, and also attract foreign investors, which create jobs and prosperity. So I would probably stop here and give a floor to my colleague.
Thank you,
Almas.
Medina. It was very heartening to hear that the banks in the region met the stress test. This was not a theoretical stress test, but a real test. And it was very encouraging. Mr. Deputy Minister, if you could give us about 4 minutes, and then we could get one final round of questions. Our aim is to finish at 2 minutes past the hour because we started 2 minutes late.
Thank you. Of course, it's my great pleasure to take part as official launch of ITIC report, Foreign Investment in Central Asia, Actors and Drivers. I would like to thank Mr. Daniel Witt, you and Dr. Ariel Cohen and Mr. James Grant for their consistent commitment to provide independent and thorough analysis and policy recommendation to improve investment climate and spur economic growth in transition and developing economies. Disruption caused by COVID pandemic result in unparalleled challenge to the world's healthcare system and its economic potential. The IMF now expects the global production to shrink by unprecedented 4.4%, sending the living standards back to their 2017 levels. We are all aware of that prospects depend on the duration of the health crisis and on the effectiveness of policy interventions to mitigate the economic effects of the pandemic. The impact, however, varies across the regions. The most severe implications are expected to happen in developing countries, heavily depends on the investment and global value chain intensive and extractive industries. In 2020, according to the UNCTAD data, as you know, FDI inflows to the economic in transition projected to decline by about 40%. The degree of construction project is similar to the world average. Growth in FDI is forecast to return to the region by only 2022. Gross FDI inflows to Kazakhstan, the third largest recipient of FDI among these economies, contributed 8.1 billion in the first half of 2020 by approach of growth. We're, however, confident that the measures the government are taken both in terms of battling the spread of the virus and supporting the economy will return the world to its pre-pandemic growth trajectory. Kazakhstan has been doing relatively well in the global context. In the 3 summer months, we have managed to first stabilize and contain the incidence rate under 120 cases per day. that later enabled us to gradually reopen some part of the economy. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the US government, which operated through USAID and CDC to support Kazakhstan in its fight with the pandemic. We are grateful to protective equipment for frontline workers, etc. I am pleased to note that our continuous work on improving the quality of the public and private institutions has been recognized by the World Bank in its latest worldwide governance indicators report. The bank improved our ranking on 5 out of 6 main indices, namely government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption, and political stability. Our consistent efforts to reduce the role of the state and build a better business environment have earned us recognition as the most business-friendly economy in the region. Reflecting our success on this front, the World Bank ranked us 25th in their most recent 2020 Doing Business ranking, and we hope that in future we can improve this. And in this regard, we highly value strategic and mutually beneficial cooperation with our Western partners, including the United States. The US remains our second largest investor and accounts for almost a quarter of the total FDI inflows to Kazakhstan since its independence. In the first half of 2020, gross FDI inflows to Kazakhstan from the USA amounted almost $1.1 billion US dollars. As of today, over 560 American companies successfully operate in Kazakhstan. We deeply value their contribution to the capacity of the national economy and are committed to continue to provide support and assistance necessary for their further growth and development. The US is also one of our most important trade partner. In the last year, the trade turnover reached 2.2 billion, and I hope since the next year we will be able to reach again these figures. And the world is now slowly and unevenly approaching the recovery stage of the crisis. It's important to draw good lessons from the past year. We have to reimagine our economy to address the need to be diversify our production processing, incentivize resilience both in the real sector and services, upgrade logistics to better adapt to the likely repeat pandemic, and of course look for new opportunities of growth. Obviously, not a single country, whether it's developed or developing one, can face this task alone. The deglobalization and isolationism trends that have been picking up lately must be reversed. This is the best way to ensure synchronic and balanced recovery for all members of the international community. Thank you for your attention, please.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that brings us to the conclusion where we're at our 1 hour period. Again, there's no short fixes. The roadmap laid out by Dr. Cohn at the beginning is the path that has been proven time and time again for success. And what has been particularly impressive as we look at Kazakhstan is from the very beginning, their investment in human capital, in human resources. We talk a lot about natural resources, oil, gas, hard rock minerals, but to have this transformation and this growth move forward in a sustainable and inclusive way, you need the investment in human capital. And we're seeing that in the region, and that gives me great hope that everything else will fall into place with these human resources there. So with that, I encourage everyone to read the report. We welcome your feedback. Emails will be included. Everyone within 24 hours will receive the links that relate to this virtual launch that we have all enjoyed today. I want to thank each of you, over 100 participants, and our distinguished panelists for being with us today. We look forward to continuing our work in cooperation together. And at this time of year, I want to wish you all a happy holiday season. And again, congratulate the countries in the region as you will soon be celebrating your Independence Days. So with that, thank you very much and good day.